we have an unidentified flying object.
Good evening, my fellow Americans. The sighting over Washington yesterday has alarmed many of you. However, please, do not... We close?
Yeah, we're close.
2001 was a real space odyssey for me. Instead of flying on a spaceship to the moon, Jupiter, or beyond the solar system, I met Dan Aykroyd for the first time to talk about UFOs. That's when I knew I had to sit him down in front of a camera and just let him talk about the truth. Because if I didn't, no one would believe we had this amazing conversation. And one time I had this long conversation with Dan Aykroyd about UFOs, and I thought it was like Einstein was hiding inside of a comic genius, just so that if he told us the real truth, you wouldn't have to believe it. If Einstein had told us UFOs were real, would we have believed him? He never spoke about it. But Dan Aykroyd speaks about UFOs as if he were a full professor on the subject. So Dan, how did you get started in UFOs? What sparked your interest? What was the first thing that you can remember that happened to you that made you, ponder the question?
Well, I was born in July 1952, and I guess about maybe when I was 8 years old, I found a magazine, a Life magazine, with a picture of the UFOs from that sighting on the cover, with a big inquiry. What are these UFOs? And so that kind of started it as a kid, and I asked my parents about it, and they actually couldn't tell me what they were because they didn't know. They knew there was some mystery there. Then I saw The Day the Earth Stood Still as a kid, and that was a film that directly related to maybe some of the motives for visitations from other planets. And it certainly seems accurate today if you look at the way mankind in the last 100 years has basically started to turn this planet into a cinder. 3-4 holes in the ozone layer because of industrial production around the world, nuclear testing, wars. I'm just sure, just in theory, if there were another species in the universe monitoring us or near us, they would be very interested in what we're doing to this planet, to this planet's atmosphere, and to possibly neighboring bodies. So there would be a concern there. And I think that in terms of the extraterrestrial machines that are coming and going, that may be a part of their motivation.
We've just had a rash of sightings all over the planet, and we've got Iran and Turkey and Mexico. It seems like we're being invaded by UFOs. Let's talk first just about what's actually happening out there.
Well, recently, the most dynamic sighting that we've seen, because it's corroborated by an actual government, is the sighting that took place over Mexico recently, where a drug surveillance twin-engine turboprop plane was at altitude taking pictures of possible smuggling routes, and they photographed with their infrared cameras 11 unidentified objects. Some of them were in pairs and in threes, and of course, these were objects that couldn't be seen by the naked eye, but were visible on the infrared cameras. Well, the United States Air Force, after the news appeared in America, and it was covered on CNN and Fox. The footage was shown on Fox. It was shown on CNN, and in the Valley Daily News on the front page had a big headline, UFOs with a question mark, and it had pictures from that sighting. And of course, the United States Air Force had to respond, and they said it was swamp gas. So I don't know whether swamp gas is not visible to the naked eye and visible on infrared, whether it comes in multiple balls, whether swamp gas is capable of doing a complete circuit around an aircraft and then taking off at high speed and right angles into the sky. If it is, then maybe it was swamp gas. But somehow this seems to be a legitimate one, because the Mexican government decided we want to release this to the world. And this follows on the heels of the Belgian general who revealed some F-15 footage years ago of his Air Force planes chasing objects that were exceeding them in speed by twice again what his planes were going at. The French government, over the last couple of years, has released a comprehensive study on the UFOs. The Soviets have been, since the 1950s, engaged in numerous studies about landings, abductions, and the sightings. So we do have legitimate government inquiry going on. And in fact, as anyone in the field knows, the United States government for years has been covering this issue because they were compelled to cover it, because of Ken Arnold's sighting, because of the sighting over Washington in July '52, just after I was born, the famous shot of the V-shaped lights over the Capitol and over the Coast Guard station. So the government initiated originally, I believe it was, there were Project Sign, Project Grudge, the Condon Report, Project Blue Book, and then they engaged J. Allen Hynek. So, the French, Belgian, Mexican, Iranian, and Turkish governments are not the only ones who address this issue. Our good old USA government has, in fact, seen the necessity to put people's fears or concerns at rest. And as anybody in the field knows, these studies went on, and these studies revealed that, most of the sightings could be explained through conventional means, as either hoaxes or weather climatic things, but many of the sightings were unexplained. And so therein is where lies the mystery in all of this.
Dan, what do you think is the significance of UFO technology? I mean, obviously, these guys, the extraterrestrials, can come from one star system to another and visit Earth. I mean, recent headlines on CNN are talking about, and BBC, that we're going to run out of oil in 2026. We've got to get on to a better technology. I mean, to be able to go from another star system to Earth, obviously they have the answer.
Well, the presence of these obviously intelligently controlled machines tells us that we are dealing with beings who have anywhere from 1,000 to 1 million to 10 million to 1 billion years advancement in technology on us. So you've got to figure that look what happened in the last 100 years. We have the Wright brothers at the turn of the century taking off in basically a fabric and wood aircraft. By 1969, we have lunar expeditions. In the year 2004, we have massive airplanes being built out of alloys and graphite, and this big ship that Airbus is building, the new Boeing plane. So in 100 years, from fabric and wood, we've come to, advanced metallurgy, fuel use, and propulsion in just 100 years. Imagine what a culture could accomplish in 1,000 years, or 10,000 years, or 1 million years, or 1 billion years. It's not inconceivable that you have intelligently manufactured and controlled machines that can not only traverse great distances in space by mastering gravity and the time-space continuum, but also the interdimensional travel that might be possible. Many theories now purport that there were not only 4 dimensions at the creation of the entire multiverse 14 billion years ago at the time of the Big Bang. There were 11, maybe as many as 21 dimensions. So some of these beings may be coming from an extra-dimensional place. I mean, and what it says is that these technologies have been harnessed, and that it's possible to use other fuels that don't rely just on simple combustion. And there are many theories. I mean, some theories are that the military already knows about these forms of propulsion and lighter-than-air vehicles or metals that can be vibrated to a certain point where they become they become light waves, photons. But they're not telling us. They're not going to reveal that, obviously, to us, and we just have to keep the search going. So I think that it's incumbent on us as a race on this planet to begin to find alternatives to the fossil fuels, but we're just not doing it fast enough.
It's probably been the greatest and most successful cover-up in the history of the world. UFOs are as real as the airplanes that fly over your head. That is my unequivocal conclusion.
Oh my God.
The Avro Arrow story, Dan, I mean, you appeared in a movie about the Avro Arrow story. Canada broke the sound barrier. Diefenbaker dismantles the whole aerospace program in Canada, and all the engineers are hired by NASA and Boeing down here, and we finally break the sound barrier. But in Canada today, we have another scientist, Canadian scientist John Hutchison, is using wave induction, using Van de Graaff and Tesla coils and radio. On a 75-pound cannonball, we can see this huge cannonball levitating in the air. I mean, Boeing, NASA, Lockheed, all of these defense contractors are going up into his lab in Canada and trying to understand how this thing works, because the next person or the next country that figures out true anti-gravity propulsion systems is going to be king of aerospace on this planet.
The Hutchison effect incorporates radio frequencies, Tesla frequencies, and high electrostatic energy to create a type of levitation effect where it can move a 75-pound cannonball of steel or brass bushings, water, wood, and other objects into the air.
Are we doing enough in our universities, in our research labs? Are we putting enough money into this kind of a research? And what risks are we willing to take if universities in Beijing and China and Russia, they're actually going into the UFO phenomenon in their universities? But here in America, mainstream science, mainstream physicists laugh at the UFO phenomena. I mean, what do you think about that?
Budgets are tight all around the world, and as far as putting money into the study of alternative technologies, funding research by people like Hutchison, the money is just not there. I mean, if you look at NASA is getting chopped back because the funds that are flowing through government now are focused on the war in Iraq and other things. So we don't even have the money to keep up conventional space exploration, development of metallurgy, fuels, ion drive systems. So I don't see any government in the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years really putting the money into the kind of research that's needed to develop these alternative systems and to perhaps study what is driving these intelligent machines from somewhere else. Now, of course, that's on the visible side of things. We're hearing a lot about these special access programs where congressional money is approved by a very narrow slice of the membership in the legislature and given to the military to do basically carte blanche what they want with. So there could be a black military program that is producing what people are referring to now as the big black deltas, which are these huge black triangles that are being seen all around the world. The big black rectangles, which are also being seen all around the world. So maybe they look a little like this. The F-117, they look a little like the B-2 bomber. Maybe these are special access programs that have been applied to alternative technology. The sighting over Washington yesterday has alarmed many of you. However, please, do not... We close?
Yeah, we're close. 2001 was a real space odyssey for me. Instead of flying on a spaceship to the moon, Jupiter, or beyond the solar system, I met Dan Aykroyd for the first time to talk about UFOs. That's when I knew I had to sit him down in front of a camera and just spoke about it. But Dan Aykroyd speaks about UFOs as if he were a full professor on the subject. So Dan, how did you get started in UFOs? What sparked your interest? What was the first thing that you can remember that happened to you that made you, ponder the question?
Well, I was born in July 1952.
Let him talk about the truth. Because if I didn't, no one would believe we had this amazing conversation. And one time I had this long conversation with Dan Aykroyd about UFOs, and I thought it was like Einstein was hiding inside of a comic genius, just so that if he told us the real truth, you wouldn't have to believe it. If Einstein had told us UFOs were real, would we have believed him? He never spoke.
We have an unidentified flying object.
Good evening, my fellow Americans.